Okay, good morning to everyone, and welcome back to day 3 of our plenary sessions. Not surprisingly, we're going to focus on sustainability today. I have to admit, we may be the only ones who know this, but congratulations to Sachiko Koichi for Japan's winning the World Baseball Classic last night. I have to say my Phillies players on the U.S. team were the only ones who did well offensively with 2 home runs, but well done. I think that's the 3rd time Japan's won it too. So congratulations. So I'm going to hand it over to Josephine. It looks like we're ready to take on lucky part 7 of the sustainability draft. Josephine, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Yes, so we'll be continuing on with Warren and Susan on responding to risks and material misstatement, which is part 7, and then we'll be moving into part 8. We have accumulation and consideration of identified misstatements, which Isabel and Joanna will be covering, and then we'll be moving into evaluating the description of applicable criteria, where we'll hear from Wolf and Claire. And then back to Isabel and Adriana for subsequent events and written representations. And then Isabel and Claire will be covering the concluding, which is the other information, and forming the assurance conclusion. And then we'll be moving into the reporting section. So seems like a lot to cover, but they're smaller sections. And the big piece at this stage is over to Susan and Warren. Thank you.
So that means over to Warren.
Brilliant. Susan, can you confirm if you can hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Lovely. All right. Thank you, everybody, for your feedback yesterday evening on part 6. Without any further ado, we work swiftly, hopefully, through part 7, responding to risks of material misstatement. Susan and I would like to draw your attention now to paragraphs 1L and then 1R, but also through to paragraph 8, linked to 1R. Unless I am mistaken, I think this is the first time the board is seeing the full part 7 in a single pack. Susan will correct me if I am wrong, but this is probably the first time you're seeing it in a full pack. The key points that we just want to draw your attention to is the fact that we obviously have in the back of our mind in part 6 and part 7 really being concerned about making sure that there's a clear differential between limited assurance and reasonable assurance, and we've stuck with that in part 7. No real major changes there. We continue to focus on those areas where misstatements are likely to occur for the limited assurance, and then focusing on risks at the assertion level and responding to those risks with appropriate procedures when it comes to the reasonable assurance engagement. Those of you that have worked through the EER guidance in detail will notice that we've relied heavily on the content from that guidance, particularly Appendix 3, to help with the drafting of Part 7, and of course ISAE 3000, which was in line with our brief. To put it very simply, Susan came up with a really great explanation for explaining the difference between limited and reasonable assurance in a succinct way. We like to think of there as being different levers, which we can adjust as we're going through our assurance engagement to try and explain why you've transitioned from limited to reasonable. That first lever was the way in which we thought about risk, which is what we discussed in part 6. The second lever goes onto the nature and the type of the tests which you can potentially perform. And then the third lever is the actual quantum of the testing which is carried out. And that's explained basically throughout part 7, but in particular with reference to paragraph A7, where I think Susan explains those 3 levers really well. Mindful of the board's suggestion that we should clarify why the practitioner was gaining all of that understanding about the entity, controls, etc. We've clarified here that you're either identifying areas where risks are likely to occur, again, the limited assurance, or those areas where you're dealing with risks at the assertion level for reasonable assurance. And we explain how that risk assessment leads to the development of further audit procedures in part 7. We've also specifically referred to the risk of misstatement due to fraud, and we're drawing our attention to that largely in light of the plenary discussions at the first part of yesterday's meeting. There's also accompanying application guidance. That's specifically in paragraphs 2 and then in A8 and A9. So that's the overview really of these parts which we're dealing with, and we're now open to comments.
Okay. So we're gonna do paragraphs 1L, 1R, and to 8, and accompanying application material. Kai.
Thanks, Tom, and good morning, everyone. I have one comment to paragraph 3. Why the requirement in this paragraph is suitable for a reasonable assurance.
Kai, sorry, we're doing 1L to 1R to 8, yeah? Which paragraph?
Through
is it?
8. Through 8.
Through 8?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
So
And what
It's-
I didn't hear what paragraph you're on.
I mentioned paragraph 3.
Perfect, thank you. Sorry,
Yeah,
I just
so-
didn't
sorry
hear.
for this. Okay.
No, it's me.
Yeah, yeah,
Thanks.
right. No, that's fine. That's fine. Yeah. I repeat, why the requirement that is paragraph 3 is suitable for a reasonable assurance engagement. I do not believe it is appropriate for limited assurance engagement, because it would not allow practitioners to use reports or other information generated by the information system of the entity as a basis for inquiries or analytic procedures without testing the controls over the preparation of those reports or information, because practitioners might be construed as relying on those controls. I suggest that a separate requirement for limited assurance engagement be worded as follows. If the practitioner intends to obtain evidence from testing the operating effectiveness of controls, the practitioner shall design and perform test of controls as to their operating effectiveness to obtain such evidence. That has my comment to referring to paragraph 3. I think I have one further comment. Paragraph 8 is included, right? Yeah. So I have a small comment to paragraph 8 in line with my comments on paragraph 3. Paragraph 8 would need to be differentiated between limited and assurance and reasonable assurance. And then I have one brief comment referring to the application material, and therefore paragraph A2. The first sentence of A2 only applies to reasonable assurance engagement as written, because it presumes a risk assessment. This has been my 3 comments. Thanks.
Okay. Shall we?
Good morning, everyone, and thanks, Warren, for the introductory comments. I have a terminology kind of question, probably. I realized throughout the drafting and in 3000, risk of material misstatement seems to be used exclusively for reasonable assurance rather than limited. So the title of part 7 is responding to risk of material misstatement. So just wondering whether that is the appropriate title, and related to, and in 3000, I think this part, or this section relating to this part, is called obtaining evidence. So something to think about. And related to that comment, paragraph, I know this is beyond 8, but paragraph 15, for example, it talks about if practitioner uses sampling when responding to risk, accessories of material misstatement. But I think the content is actually relevant to limited as well. So just wondering whether we're tying it to reasonable just by usage of that term. Thanks.
Okay, anyone else? Julie?
Thanks. And Warren, this is a bit of a carry-on comment from yesterday, and it has to do with paragraph 2 and the topic of fraud, and whether or not we think we've got adequate content in this standard dealing with fraud. So I know I brought it up yesterday, I think in part 6, which was, do we need something more to talk about the fact that you could have risks of material misstatement in a reasonable assurance due to fraud, or potentially risks you've identified in limited assurance due to fraud. I don't think you have it out in either one. And so when I read paragraph 2, it just kind of stuck out to me because now we're talking about identified fraud or suspected fraud. So I just wonder overall if, and in light of some of the comments we heard yesterday around greenwashing and the like, if we've got the right balance in the standard with respect to fraud. So I'm just bringing it up again, because I think when you're responding, you also need to think about where those risks might be and what your responses might be. Thanks.
Okay. Warren and Susan.
Okay, thank you. So Kai, your comment actually has been brought to my attention by Wolf. We've had discussions about this, so we can bring this back to the task force and work that out there. I understand what you're saying because I've heard it from Wolf.
Right, thanks.
Several times. We will look to also, I will also look to paragraph 8 to see if we can differentiate between reasonable and limited as well. And I also, the drafting in paragraph 2, I understand your point there too, so fine. Chun-Wee, I understand your point, and I think we do need to talk about this at the task force and the relationship between identifying a disclosure where a misstatement is likely to arise, and when that becomes a risk that you're following up on in part 7. So I'm not sure if the idea is to, or the best idea would be to change the title, change the wording, but that's something we will bring definitely up to the task force, because I think it's a very good point. So, and then again, Julie, also fraud, that'll definitely be on the agenda. So I take your point, and particularly after all the discussions yesterday.
Yeah.
So
Maybe just to add there, Susan. So Julie, I mean, I agree entirely with what Susan has said. I think the whole issue of greenwashing, and then also this whole concept of double materiality, which, as Josephine pointed out, is still in progress, will probably end up being dealt with concurrently as by the task force. We probably do need to think about that in more detail, not only in part 7, but I mean across the whole standard, just to make sure that we've addressed those 2 key themes. Because they do keep popping up over and over again with all of the stakeholders who are interested in this document. So thank you very much for raising that again. All right, let's move to slide 39. So here in 19R to 17, we deal specifically with substantive analytics and substantive procedures or substantive tests of details. And again, you'll notice hopefully a difference between limited and reasonable assurance. For our reasonable assurance engagements, we've clarified that the practitioner performs substantive tests for those risks that are closer to the upper end of the risk spectrum. And that's just in keeping with a well-established, I suppose we could call it assurance doctrine, that's come out of 3410. It's certainly in ISA 330 as well. We've decided to retain that. We've also decided to deal with external confirmations and a conditional requirement for an overall response. And that just ties back to the commentary we had about part 6, where the assurance provider has that overall assessment of risk. Accompanying application guidance is largely consistent with what you saw in December, but nevertheless, Susan and I are open now to questions or comments on 9R to 17 and the associated application material.
Okay, 9R to 17, Edo.
Thank you, and good morning, everybody. Warren and Susan, I started this yesterday, and this is in respect of 9R, where there's a requirement to perform further procedures for each risk, where the assessment of that risk is closer to the upper end of the spectrum. And this is where it's different from the auditing standards, where for all material classes of transactions, account balances, and disclosures, we need to do some work. And that's so I'm wondering if you're missing something here, because if we just are focusing on those risks, there could be quite a bit that we're not required to touch by virtue of further procedures. So I was struggling with this. Thank you.
Okay, Sachika.
Good morning, everybody. I have 3 comments on this area. And first comment is, I think maybe similar to Edu's comment on paragraph 9R. I think maybe this requirement is based on the requirement in 330 about significant risk, but I think it should require a performance of a substantive procedure that are specifically responsive to that risk, because the current wording just refer to further procedure for each risk rather than substantive procedure. And also, I think we need to have a requirement to perform substantive procedure for reasonable assurance in addition to paragraph 9R, because for example, paragraph 18 of 330 and also in 3410 GHG information, paragraph 40R require performance of substantive procedure for each material type of transaction account balances of disclosures, irrespective of risk. Maybe this is because ISA 5000 does not have the concept similar to material class of transaction, etc. But I think certain requirement relating to substantive procedure is needed. For example, maybe we can consider having a requirement to perform substantive procedure for identified risk or material misstatement. That's my first comment. And my second comment is, it's wording, but paragraph 12R, it says that the practitioner should design and implement overall responses to address the assessed risk. I think maybe it's a kind of similar comment with Chumi, but maybe we don't need assessed here because maybe it's different from Chumi because he's talking about limited story. Because in part 6, risk assessment of the sustainability information as a whole is not needed. So maybe we don't need risk assessed here. And my last comment is about application material, which is paragraph 823. It says, in many cases, disclosures and other information allows for the design of powerful analytical procedure, but I think it may only apply to GHG information. For example, I think qualitative disclosure and other information does not necessarily allow for design of powerful analytical procedure. That's for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Well,
Sachiko, can I just confirm something with you that you just said, just to be clear? So in 12R, where we talk about the auditor designing and implementing overall responses to address the sustainability information as a whole, are you saying that you're not keen on that particular aspect of the requirement, or is it something?
No, it's just the wording, because at the last bit, it says the auditor should design and implement overall responses to address the assessed risk. But I think we do not have the requirement in the part 6 to assess overall risk. So it's just the wording. Maybe we don't need the word assessed. Yeah.
okay, thank you. Fernando.
Thank you, Tom. Good morning, everyone. I'm also having a comment in 9R, and it has to be, and it's related here to this phrase, close to the upper end of the spectrum. So the word spectrum is only used once in the requirements, and it's here, and it's only used once in the application material, somewhere, can't remember exactly, in a very short paragraph. And I think that for us, with the audit background, I think now we're more familiar with the meaning and what we need to do and how we understand that. But if we go back when we discussed 315, it was pretty messy really for a lot of us here and outside in practice to really get it. So I think that we either need to change the word in the requirement or add more application material, because whoever is going to use it in practice, they may not really get what we're trying to say here in this requirement, and would really create more confusion rather than really helping practitioners. Thank you.
Good point. Okay. Wendy?
Thank you, Tom, and good morning, everyone. This is a broad comment and that came to mind in 10R. And I think we discussed earlier in the week disclosures, aspects of topics, but yesterday what came to light is there are certainly going to be a lot of elements or details that have to be addressed based on CSRD and what's in some of the reporting requirements. So specifically as it relates to 10R, the practitioner shall consider whether external confirmation procedures are to be performed. At what level are we talking about? Is it at the disclosure level, the aspect level, the topic level? And then do we really want documentation on each of those considerations? So just that the broad comment is there's a lot. I think in one of the slides yesterday, there's possibly 1,000 elements or something like that. So at what level is this going to be done? And it may apply elsewhere in the standard, but it came to mind here in 10R.
Shiv?
Sorry, thanks. Good morning, everybody. So just two quick comments on 12R. This is the follow-on from what I raised on part 6 yesterday. Given what we've introduced relating to controls in part 6 in 14L, I think we probably need a follow-up of what the follow-up action is if there are concerns over controls in here. So a 12L. And then in the outreach relating to paragraph 15, there was a request for consideration of whether we're going to provide anything more relating to how you calculate sample sizes and things. I think what we've done is taken something quite light from LCE, but a discussion perhaps, and I assume in application material of how to determine sample sizes or what's considered would be helpful. Thanks.
Okay. Shall we?
Thanks. And this is probably a broader kind of comment, and it's triggered by the specific focus areas above 19L and 19R. The title is Estimates, including forward-looking information. And even though we suggest that the requirements here relate to forward-looking information, I think the content is really lifted entirely from 3410. And 3410, as we know, covers quantitative information only. And when I look at the requirement, I look at the application material, I can't really see, and maybe a broader question is, have we provided sufficient steer or guidance to practitioners on how they should be going about obtaining evidence relating to forward-looking information or qualitative information in general? Have we leveraged sufficiently on the ER guide that dedicated 2 chapters to these topics? So it's a question on the title, the content, and also more broadly, whether we need to build in more. I know we have built in content, but just personally, I feel that there needs to be more. And then one comment on application material, and this is A22. First of all, A21, I think A21 seems to fit better immediately before A23. So I think it's part of the substantive analytical procedures. So there's a geography question. And then on A22, I know this is again lifted from 3410, but I'm just wondering how relevant this application material is, especially the first part, where we talk about, for very small entities or entities at early stage of development, then you will likely want to do more substantive procedures than tests of control. I'm not sure whether that is a question on people's mind in the first place. So I thought that actually buries the second part of the application material, which is more important, which is that the absence of control activities or other component may actually make it impossible to obtain sufficient appropriate evidence. I thought that is the more important part, but it sort of get buried because of what we say in front, which is a little bit meaningless to my mind. And I think it speaks to what we have in part 6, the A59, etc. So maybe just a way to rejig this a little bit to bring it out a little bit more. Yep, that's all. Thanks.
Thank you, Eric.
Thanks, Tom, and good morning, everyone. I've only got a comment on one paragraph, and that is on 12R. The introductory wording to that says if the practitioner's evaluation of the control environment, and then it goes on to talk about various things. I was just wondering if that was broad enough, given that what we're looking at here are pervasive risks that could arise from other aspects of the practitioner's understanding. We looked at paragraph A62R in part 6, which talks about the components of internal control and control activities and control deficiencies identified. And so just wondered whether this wording needs to be broadened a little bit in the intro wording at the start of the requirement. Thank you.
Okay. Last but not least, Julie.
Thank you. And Warren and Sue, bear with me here because I do have a few comments. So when I look at paragraph 9, I had this similar comment to 9R that you've already heard around the upper end, so I won't repeat that. But in paragraph 9, we don't have anything in the column for limited assurance. So does that mean that we wouldn't expect substantive procedures in a limited assurance engagement? Because I was under the impression that there could be a variety of procedures and some of them would be substantive depending on where you're sort of doing this meaningful level of limited assurance. So when you look at that section, you would walk away, I think, thinking you don't do any substantive procedures, which is actually inconsistent with the rest of part 7, because in part 7, as you go along, you've got things like analytical procedures, you've got sampling that applies to both levels. So I wasn't clear about that point when I got to paragraph 9. It's also a bit inconsistent with paragraph 11, because paragraph 11 is talking about when you perform substantive procedures at an interim date. And from my read, that's applicable to both limited and reasonable. So it drives an inconsistency there in my mind as to what we're saying about limited assurance for that point. When I get to 12R, I understand what we're driving at, but it wasn't clear to those that read it whether you needed to tick all 3 of those conditions to trigger this response, or just one, or some combination of them. So it wasn't clear to them, and I can see that point. And it was also unclear to those that don't do financial statement audits all the time, what we meant by overall response. So I think if we keep that term, we need to explain it a little bit better, because it wasn't clear to the reader what I do, what would be overall responses. I think there's a little bit in the application material that talks about it, but it wasn't sufficient to get that understanding. And then I wonder if there needs to be some connection between 12R and part 6, because there's no mention of it, this risk that might arise at an overall level or like a pervasive level in part 6, but then we have this response in part 7. So it felt disconnected to me. The sampling point, from what I understand from those that perform these engagements today, sampling is probably the most common procedure that they perform in responding to risks or doing substantive procedures. And there was a sense that we probably needed a little bit more. I think there's maybe some application material in 3410. I have reference to paragraph A105 that might be helpful there. They just felt like it needed a little bit more to drive consistency with that. And then in the substantive analytical procedures, sorry, I'm just getting to my place. Are we saying in the reasonable assurance section that, sorry, I'm going to find it, 14R, it's 14R, that you may not need to do further investigation of differences between your expectation and the actual results beyond inquiry? Because when I read 14R little b, it doesn't say you need to perform other procedures, it just says as necessary. So it left me wondering if you have fluctuations that are greater than your expectation, do you need to do anything beyond inquiry? Because inquiry is required, but it didn't seem like further procedures were required. Thank you.
Thank you. Diane?
Thanks, Tom. Hello, everybody. I was just going to echo one of the comments that Julie had, and it was back to paragraph 11, which was again just clarifying, would this be appropriate for both reasonable and limited assurance? We would think that we're questioning particularly the substantive procedures when you're in a limited assurance arrangement. Thanks.
Okay, I think that's the last hand. Susan?
So that was a lot. But I am sensing some themes here. I think that we need to clarify when substantive procedures are required and when they're not required. I think we need to consider sampling in particular. I heard a couple of calls for sampling, a couple of calls for additional application material with respect to sampling, substantive analytical procedures, and the spectrum of risk and how that works. And there's quite a few other comments on this list, which I will take to the task force and continue on. If there's, Josephine, you think I got the big ones?
That's right. And then there's just maybe we need to have another look at what we mean by overall procedures as well.
Yes.
And the
Yes,
the
and the
requirement
connection
there.
with part 6.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, perfect.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Should we move on?
Warren,
All
you're up.
right. Yeah. Slide 40. Right, so the last slide for part 7 is wrapping up with 18L to 21L and R, and then the associated application material. We want to draw your attention to the fact that 18L deals specifically again with further procedures for limited assurance engagements where the practitioner becomes aware of any issues which may suggest that sustainability information is materially misstated. Given the likelihood of encountering judgments and estimates, we do then have that guidance on judgments and estimates added mainly in 19L and 19R, and we've already had a comment on that one, which we'll deal with as part of the responses that we get now. More rigorous effort, of course, applies for the reasonable assurance engagement, if you refer specifically to paragraph 20R for that. As you work through those paragraphs, please keep in mind the fact that we are trying to develop an overarching standard. And then this whole concept of judgments and estimates is probably something that you could very easily write an entire standard on just in the context of sustainability information. So it's really important that we get the balance right here between giving enough information to get the job done, but at the same time not overwhelming the reader and turning this into a discussion on judgments and estimates. And then finally, we just wrap up part 7 by reminding practitioners of the fact that they should deal with how the entity actually goes about assembling all of that sustainability information. So those are the main sort of points that Susan and I wanted to summarize for you. And now we're very happy to take your comments.
Okay. Ada.
Thank you. So I've comment question in respect of 18L, and this I was wondering to raise it in respect to sampling, but I think this is a good leeway, or segue. So you are in a limited assurance engagement, and you have determined that you're going to do a sample, and that sample kicks out it's something that you need to follow up on. And how far do you then need to go? So you could double the sample and you still don't have full comfort, or are you then required to go to a sample size that satisfies reasonable assurance, because you need to conclude on what this actually means. And that's and I think it's probably close to the latter. Once you've determined that you are sampling, you need to follow it through. I don't think that's clear enough yet in here, and that clarity does need to, I think, needs to be provided here. Thank you.
Yeah, can I just, this is the deep dive. You've identified a place where that you believe the sustainability information may be materially misstated, and you need to actually, in this area, achieve reasonable assurance that it is either misstated or not.
Thank you for that clarification. If the words in the standard can reflect that, that would be great.
Okay, Sachiko.
Thank you. I have a comment on paragraph 19R and 20R with regard to estimates. I think consideration is needed whether we need to update these paragraphs to be consistent with revised version of 540, because I think the current requirement is based on 3410, which was written before 540 was revised. I don't think we need to have exact the same requirement with revised 540, but I think at least at the overall level, it should be consistent. For example, when I look at 20R small a, we don't have reference to data. We have assumption method, but we don't have anything about data. And also in 540, they are referring to the procedure to obtain evidence from events occurring up to the date of the assurance report. And I understand that 3410 does not have that, maybe because the nature of the GHG information, but as a sustainability information as a whole, maybe that is sometimes applicable. And also with regard to 20R small b, testing operating effectiveness of the control, I think this procedure is not included as one of the three testing approach in 540. It is separate point. So maybe we need to think about that. That's all for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Diane?
Hi there. Susan, I would probably add this in the category of something to noodle on, which is the estimates section. It struck me as a bit light. And in particular, when you think about, and I know there's balance here, right? This is an overarching standard, but many of these companies will have some sort of scenario analysis or forward-looking estimate. And so I do think, and what we'll do is we'll go through 540 and maybe send off to you guys a couple ideas of what we think you might want to bring in there. But I do think estimates could be a bit of a spicy area. It also could be an area where they're using an expert. So we got to weave that into it. So I just think we could beef a little bit up on the application side. Thank you.
Eric?
Thanks, Tom. I had the same comment as Sachiko on 20 and whether we should pick up some of the material from 540 and rather than the 3410 material. And the only other question was the intro wording to 19L is different from the intro wording on 19R, which talks about based on the assessed risks of material misstatement. And when I looked at 3410, they had the same basic intro wording on both limited and reasonable. And I was just wondering why they were different there. Thanks.
Okay. Julie?
Thank you. I had almost the identical comment to Sachiko and others that mentioned the 540 update. I think this section, particularly 20, could use a refresh based on 540. I picked up the same comment around the lack of reference to data, and also 20R little b doesn't resonate with me any longer based on the update to 540, which is you would just test the operating effectiveness of controls over how management made the estimate. So overall, I think the suggestion to update this to more current requirements in 540 would resonate with me as well. Thanks.
Ada?
Yes, thank you. Sorry for coming back in, but in respect of further procedures, and I think Chung-Wee triggered me on this when he talked about the forward-looking information and to what extent we have procedures dealing with those. And I understand that the approach of it being an estimate, because that is driving the forward-looking information. But if you talk to practitioners and what they have to deal with in respect to these the sustainability information, it's going to be quantitative, qualitative, or forward-looking. Well, those were the three parts, and I think we've focused largely on the quantitative, given that 3410 drives a lot of that. The forward-looking, Chung-Wee made a comment about, but I was thinking of the qualitative. So what do we need to do on qualitative disclosures? So are we comfortable that we have covered that bit off as well? And I haven't gone back yet. It's just thought that that Chung-Wee triggered, but maybe you want to have a look at that. Thank you.
Okay. It's not surprising that this section's generating some comment, but I think that's fine. It's really important that we're getting the comment now. Susan?
Well, yeah, this is the board's first crack at it, so I'm not really surprised. So Ada, some clarification of my deep dive paragraph. Definitely bring in some more on sampling, some more and 540, and update with respect to 540. And it looks like we really need to beef up our guidance on qualitative and forward-looking information, perhaps even more than just bringing in 540, particularly with respect to qualitative. So that's what I took from that round.
Any other reactions? Okay. Good. I think that's really helpful to the task force. I think just building on what we have there and adding some additional heft to the section, maybe. Okay. So let us move forward. Is it back to, are you, Warren and Susan? I think that's.
Yeah, I think we're done.
That's what I thought. I
Yeah.
didn't know if you had any concluding observations.
I wanted to say thank you very much for your input. It's really helpful to know where to focus the task force going forward. And I really appreciate it. And I look forward to your offline comments. Well, I'm a little afraid of your offline comments, but I'm looking forward to them nonetheless. All right, so thank you very much.
Thank you. So now we're going to move to part 8, and Joanna and Isabel will be joining us to talk about the accumulation and consideration of identified misstatements. So we'll just give everyone a minute, if we can, Tom, to settle.
Is your mic still on, or for some reason the camera is stuck? Why don't you turn it on and off and maybe that'll work? Maybe some of our tech help could help. Okay, hopefully we can fix the camera, but sorry for those who are observing us online. You get to, we call it the Chun-Wei cam now. We keep a close eye on you, Chun-Wei. Okay, Josephine, do you want to introduce the next section before we hand it over to Joanna and Isabel?
Well, I think Isabel's going to introduce this next section. She's all ready to go. So thank you. The only thing is I was thinking about when we were talking about materiality, Julie, yesterday, you were, or the day before, I can't remember where we were now. You were talking about perhaps some more guidance on qualitative measures, etc. And I think some of that might be in this section. So perhaps if you could bear that in mind as we go through as well, that'd be helpful. Thank you. Thank you.
So good morning, everybody. Yes, we are starting with part 8. And in fact, part 8 is splitted over several different topics. So we're going to discuss accumulation and consideration of misstatement. First, it's to be called part 8.1 during the December discussion. So you've seen it already once. Then we will discuss the evaluation and evaluating the description of the applicable criteria. Then we will move to subsequent event, which is a new part that you have not yet seen. Then written representation, which is also a new part that you have not yet seen. And then still in part 8, other information, which I'm looking forward to present to you. And it's based on ISA 720, and you will recognize part of it. So it's a very diverse part concluding, but everything you need to do in an assurance engagement before concluding your engagement. So I suggest we move to next slide. And start by the part on the accumulation and consideration of identified misstatements. So as I said, it's what was called part 8.1 during our December discussion. There have been very few modifications in the requirements, as you can see, and the modifications that have been done based on the board feedback. And there are more modification in the application material because we brought more material from the EER guidance. So nothing you have never seen because it's from the EER guidance that you're all aware of. So that being said, back to you, Tom.
Okay, paragraphs 1 through 8 concluded. Greg?
Thanks, Tom. Morning, everyone. So what got my attention was paragraph A4, F, so the emission of information. And it got me thinking about, I guess, the financial reporting framework versus sustainability reporting framework. So in the financial reporting framework, there is recognition criteria, including, you've got to have a reliable estimate. Where there's no reliable estimate, you've got somewhere to go, you've got disclosure option. So you're trying to work out a number, no reliable information, can't estimate it, therefore we'll disclose it. So that complies with the financial reporting framework that complies with GAP, auditor happy. In the sustainability reporting framework, no primary statements, of course, so straight into disclosures. What happens when there's a required disclosure where there's no reliable estimate? I guess there's some narrative explanation as to why that is by the preparer, but when does that become a problem for the auditor? Was sort of on my mind. So it's about the reliability of information. Obviously, I don't know if there's 1,000 requirements in some of these frameworks, but there's multiple frameworks. There's lots of requirements. Where's the bar for the auditor as to whether they've, do they have to do them all? Do they only have to do those where they've got reliable information? It seems quite a, I don't know, you may have covered this in earlier meetings, and I apologize, but it's quite a fundamental point in my mind that I haven't got clarity on.
Okay. Would you like to respond to that?
Maybe not provide a full response, but share personal thinking about that. I'm not sure we can develop a global requirement on that, because I think it will most probably be framework specific. And there's also some laws that rule how a practitioner has to deal with non-compliance. Probably with some framework and in some jurisdictions, you may have to report all the mandatory things that are missing. Probably in some other jurisdictions, you will have the ability just to qualify for what you consider material. But I'm not sure we can build a global guidance on that, because I think it will be most probably jurisdiction specific, but it's a personal view.
Anyone else want to come in? Any reaction, Greg?
I guess there are a lot of frameworks, and you would hope that what it is to assert compliance with this framework versus that framework is clear within each framework. But so I think what that means is there's a different, the auditor will be floating to a different level of the tide, depending on what the framework is. But it was just the notion of, is it possible that where the information's not reliable, they don't have to do it, or are the requirements such that there's some criteria they've always got to be met? So that's sort of the point, but you may have covered it, as I say, in earlier meetings.
Philip?
Thank you, Greg. And I don't think this point has come up in an earlier meeting, so I think it's a valid point that you're raising. I just want to understand, so as I understand A4 just explains this could be the reason for mistakes. And then obviously if there is an omission, then the auditor would go down the road of deciding whether that is a material misstatement, because an omission by its nature is a misstatement. And then you have to decide whether it's material. And then I guess, Isabel, it's the qualitative characteristics that appear later in the part that will then help the auditor to decide whether that's material or not, going back to also the reporting framework.
Can I just comment? I'm assuming it's material information, a bit like a big provision in the financial statement. A material number can't reliably estimate it, therefore disclosure. So I'm assuming in the sustainability space, it's material. The auditors determined it's material. It's a material requirement in the sustainability reporting framework, but the entity doesn't believe it can reliably estimate it, or the auditor doesn't believe the entity can. I guess if the auditor, no, it's more the entity doesn't believe it can, so that it hasn't put anything in there. So it's an omission. Is the auditor automatically unhappy with all omissions, or are there some where there's some leeway because it's unreliable?
Here again, I think it's related to the criteria, because some criteria allow omission when you believe it's not relevant or you cannot determine it, and some other criteria will be just compliance criteria, and you need to provide something, and if it's missing, it's missing.
Okay. Kai?
I have only a brief comment referring to A5 in the application material. With respect to the last two sentences in this paragraph, I believe a distinction needs to be made between fair presentation on the one hand side and compliance frameworks on the other side. Maybe it's helpful. Thanks.
Okay. Wendy?
Thank you, Tom. Just a consideration as it relates to number 2. It strikes me that that perhaps belongs in part 7, but I also come back to some of the concerns I had earlier in my career on this board with the EER guidance, that perhaps it was too late. And here I think it's too late that we're remaining alert. And this also ties into fraud, because so this comment is related to 2 plus the application material. Can we consider moving it up earlier in the standard?
Okay. Okay, Isabel and Joanna.
So thank you for this comment. We will have a look at A5. Probably there's still some fine tuning in some parts of the standard on the difference between fair presentation framework and compliance framework. So it's an interesting one to look at. And Wendy, we will have a look at paragraph 2. Thank you.
I think we can proceed.
So next part is the evaluating the description of the applicable criteria, and I hand over to Claire and Wolf.
Okay, do you want me to go straight ahead, Josephine? Yeah, okay, fantastic. So this part was presented in December as part 8.2. It contains just one requirement, paragraph 9, and related application material. We've made no changes since December. We re-present it to you for further discussion. And yep, so really over the discussion. Thank you, Tom.
Peter?
Yes, thank you, Claire. And I appreciate the text hasn't changed and I have no issue with the text. I'm just wondering if this is this sitting right in conclusion, or is this part of the further procedures that intuitively felt more a part 7 requirement than a part 8 requirement? But maybe you want to have a look at that. Thank you.
Okay, geographical reminder. Okay, I think we can move on to the next section.
Okay, Isabel, back to you. Thank you.
Yes, and with Adriana this time. So moving to the next topic, which is subsequent event, and I think we will take maybe separately subsequent event and written representation because it's different paragraph. So for subsequent event, it's new, but it's not new in the context of sustainability assurance, because we had requirements in IAASB 3000 and IAASB 3410. So we built on the requirements that were in this standard. And we also brought some application material from some paragraph that we have in draft ISA for LCE. So what is important to know about subsequent event, if you have in mind ISA 560, is that in ISA 3000, and we have not changed that, we work on subsequent events up to the date of the assurance report. So we don't have the concept of date of the financial statements to the date of issuance. And so if you remember in ISA 560, we have several times that we look at. Here is just from the date of the sustainability information to the date of the assurance report. And it's made very clear in paragraph 10. You may have noted that we changed the shall consider that is currently in ISA 3000 to a shall perform and shall evaluate in paragraph 10. It's because we believe that the practitioner has a responsibility similar to the one in an audit, because it's important. We also discussed the connectivity between the financial statements and the sustainability information. So there's no good reason why you would have a weaker work effort for subsequent event when you perform a assurance and sustainability information than when you perform an audit. Subsequent event may be very important in the field of sustainability assurance, because you may have elements that occur post the date of the sustainability information and that are very important and that question what has been reported or that needs to be reported. And you find example of such events in paragraph A30. And thanks to Neil, we were able to bring some good real-life example of what could be a subsequent event that may require disclosure in sustainability information. And you have an interesting example on human resources for accident injuries, for example, that may have occurred post the sustainability information date. What is also very important, and that has not changed compared to 3000 or compared to what we have in an audit, is that we have no responsibility to perform anything after the date of the assurance report. We just have to respond appropriately if we are aware of a subsequent event. So it's not changed, and you will find that in paragraph 11. That being said, back to you, Tom.
Okay, on subsequent events, Diane.
Isabel, thank you for your introduction, because I was a little bit hung up with the wording in 10A, with the wording saying up to the date of the assurance report. I understand your explanation, and I can see that that's coming from IOC 3000. I would just suggest that when you make a pit stop over at 31R, it's got different wording because that's being pulled in from LCE. That one uses the more traditional concept of the date of the sustainability information to the date of the assurance report. So you may just want to, if the appropriate one is what we've got in 10A, we should just make that consistent with what's in A31R. Thank you.
Okay. Ada?
Thank you. Isabel, you mentioned that there's no good reason why there should be differential requirements in respect of subsequent events. I think there's good reason for differential requirements. The way it's phrased now is perform procedures. And then in the application materials as well, the procedures may include inquiry. Whereas to the nature of a limited assurance engagement, I would think that inquiry over that period would be sufficient in the context of a limited assurance engagement. And as such, so we could solve that in a couple of ways by creating a differential requirement that inquiry would be sufficient, or change the application material that perform procedures may comprise solely of, or something to that effect. But I think there is a work effort differential that we can pursue here. Thank you.
So to clarify, Ada, you're saying that in terms of the actual requirement perform procedures, you don't feel that the scalability in A31L is sufficient to get you into the position where the performing procedures in a limited assurance engagement can be inquiry, if that's sufficient in the context of the subsequent events. You actually want to see that differentiation directly in the requirement as well.
It doesn't have to be in the requirement, but at the moment, the application material says procedures may include. So it's always something in addition to inquiry. That's how it's currently written.
Okay, thank you.
So it's a phraseology, it's more clarity in the phrasing. Okay.
Maybe I forgot to mention, and we will see it in the next section, but that we also included mandatory representation and subsequent events in the management representation letter. So it's not only inquiries, there will be also the request for management representation.
Wendy?
Similar comment to Diane's on the application material words being the same as 10A, but my preference is to put sustainability information back into 10A, similar to what's in ISRE 3000.
Josephine? Did you, Dan?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. And just in response to the comments on referring to the date of the sustainability information, the task force did have a chat about that. And it wasn't clear that in all cases, sustainability information would have a specific date. And so the task force thought that the better approach would be to use the wording in 3000, which was events occurring up to the date of the assurance report. What we may need to do is have a look at the wording in the application material, make sure that that wording aligns with what's in the requirement.
And that's that was sort of thematic in the comments about consistency of language. Okay. I think we can move on to the next part.
So we move to the next part, which is written representation. So we developed it based on IAASB 3410. That was more developed. We have to keep in mind that it's very important to have management representation because it's an assurance engagement, so we need to get it. What have we done? So we have a list of representation that the practitioner shall request. These representations come from IAASB 3410, as I said, except the last one, the little g. So it's 12 little g. Sorry, there's a mistake in the reference. It's not coming from IAASB 3410. It's something we considered that was necessary. So it's the representation about subsequent events. And we have not taken it for 3410. We have taken it from paragraph 9 of ISA 560. It's a requirement in ISA 560, but we thought it was something necessary as we have this focus now on a subsequent event, but we needed to request a mandatory representation on a subsequent event. So that's all I wanted to raise your attention to. Paragraph 13 leaves also the door open, of course, to ask for over-representations if needed. Thank you. Back to you, Tom.
Thank you, Isabel. Any comments on written representations? Julie.
Thank you. And Isabel, it's with 12 little b, and in ISA 3000 paragraph 56, there's a little bit more there that has a representation that management confirms the measurement or evaluation of the underlying subject matter against the applicable criteria. I'm reading those words because those are from 3,000, but I wonder if we need to have that flavor as well in the management representation section. Thanks.
So we will have a look at that, but the challenge is that there's not necessarily, could you repeat the words you used? Measurement and evaluation?
Reading it
Was
from
that?
3,000, yeah. Confirming the
And
measurement.
you don't yeah. So you don't necessarily have measurement and evaluation in the criteria. So we have to be careful not to mandate something that may not exist in the criteria, but we will have a look at it.
And I think also we'd link it back to part 3. So it's consistent also with part 3 with the engagement letter.
Yeah, and Adrienne, I raised this point in part 3, I think, as well, because I think there's something missing there around having management both acknowledge the criteria and then do the representations at the end. So I think I raised it in part 3 as well.
Okay, then we'll cross-check and do the changes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else on written representations? Okay, we can move to the next section.
Okay, so I think that it's up to you, Tom, but I think what might be quite helpful is Isabel sets up our other information, because there's a little bit we want to chat through with the board about this, and potentially then maybe take a break and come back to it in terms of
Okay.
dealing with the, is that okay?
Yeah, so
Just to give
we'll
her a
advance our break. Well, so it's 10:10 now. I say we still take a half hour. We'll reconvene at 10:40. It's almost a half hour. And we'll go back to other information. 2 minutes. Okay. I hope everyone had a good break. I think we're ready to return to other information. Isabel?
Yes, thank you. So exciting topic, other information. I will spend some time introducing this part of part 8, because first of all, you have not seen it, and probably also because other information and the work effort on other information needs some further explanation. And I'm doing that based on my past experience of having been a technical advisor long time ago at the IAASB to Cedric Gellard, who was chairing the project on ISA 720. And if you remember well, this standard ISA 720 was exposed twice. And so we now have this revised ISA 720. So back to sustainability assurance. The concept of other information is not new in ISA 3000. It was already there. It was already there also in 3410. But the requirement was very concise. Since the time we revised 3000, what has happened in the audit world? In the audit world, we have revised 720. And this revision of ISA 720 did not exist at the time we revised 3000. So that's the reason why it's not there. And also we made a very conscious decision at the time we issued ISA 720 not to perform any conforming change to 3000. So that's what we need to do right now, moving to ISA 5000. So what are we speaking about? We have a definition of other information. This definition is in the definition section that Dan presented on Monday. So what does this definition say? It says that over-information is information other than the sustainability information and the assurance report thereon, which is included in a document or documents containing the sustainability information and the assurance report thereon. We have not had any comment on this definition on Monday. So now we need to think, what does it mean? And the important paragraph to look at is A36. So now you're used to my French accent. I mean 36. So two possibilities. One possibility is that sustainability information is part of a broader report. Let's say, for example, an annual report. We have that in mind, for example, in Europe, where the CSRD sustainability report will be part of management report, which will be part of annual report. So in that situation, all information other than the sustainability information and the practitioner's report thereon is over information. So in that situation, it means, and I know some people find it strange, but it is what it is, that the financial statements themselves and the audit report are part of the other information. So it may seem strange because a practitioner has been engaged to perform a sustainability assurance engagement. Maybe this practitioner has no knowledge about financial reporting, but still, this practitioner will have to read and consider the financial statements. But what does it mean? I will provide you two examples that are from real life. Let's take, for example, climate commitments. Climate commitments are part of sustainability information. In most frameworks, there's a lot about climate. We've seen that in the IFAC study. So you will have climate commitments in the sustainability information, but in the financial statement, in the impairment disclosure, you will have disclosures about all the assumptions, and probably you will have also disclosures that take into consideration some climate commitment. And it's very important that these disclosures are consistent with the one in the sustainability information. And also probably, because being net zero is a goal that a lot of companies have right now, probably in the chairman's statement in the annual report, you will also have some information about climate commitments. So it's very important that the practitioner doing the sustainability assurance engagement reads this chairman's statement that is part of annual report, just to see if it's the same climate commitment as the one that is in the sustainability information. So that's one example that we have not introduced in the application material. As we said, we are planning in the next version to add more sustainability example, and that could be one that we could introduce. Another example that we can have in mind is an example of an headcount. Usually, headcounts are disclosed in the financial statements. And as sustainability information deals with ESG, probably under the S section, you will find headcounts. Maybe these headcounts will not be the same as in the financial statements. Probably, if the company is including value chain headcounts in the headcounts in the sustainability information, it will not be the same. So anyone reading the annual report may perceive an inconsistency. So it's very important that the sustainability information includes the disclosure of what is in the scope of this headcount, so that anyone reading the sustainability information can understand, no, it's not inconsistent, it's just not the same scope. So that's the two examples I wanted to provide to you in this example of an annual report. Then I told you we have two situations. The first one was sustainability information is part of an annual report. There's also another situation, is when the practitioner has been engaged only to provide assurance on part of the sustainability information. And then the other part of the sustainability information, the one on which the practitioner is not providing any assurance, is other information. So that's very clear also in paragraph A36, A36, as I said. So then, if you perform assurance only on part of the sustainability information, the practitioner has to read and consider the other parts of the sustainability information also for consistency. So now that we know what other information is, we need to understand why we do that. Why do we do that? So why do we do that? We do that to search for material inconsistencies. Because if there is a material inconsistency between the sustainability information and the other information, it means something is mistaken. Maybe the sustainability information is mistaken, and that's an issue for the practitioner because the sustainability information needs to be adjusted. Maybe the other information is mistaken. Maybe what is said in the notes to the financial statements or in the chairman's statements or elsewhere in the annual report is mistaken. And then for the practitioner, it's fine on one way because the sustainability information is not mistaken. But no, it's not fine because we need to keep in mind that within the ethical requirements of the IAASB code, we have an important one, which is not to be associated with misleading information. So then we have an association issue for the practitioner, because if the practitioner's report together with the sustainability information is included in a document with misstated information, then we have an association issue. So that's why the practitioner is concerned. And then last possibility, the sustainability information is not mistaken. The other information is not mistaken, but it's the practitioner understanding that was mistaken. So then the practitioner needs to update its understanding. Maybe the information is not mistaken. Take my example of the headcount. It's right in the financial statement. It's right in the sustainability report. It's not the same scope. And then the practitioner has to understand that, document that, and then it's fine. So now that we have reminded why it is important, just let's have a look at the work effort. So the work effort is a read and consider work effort. So it's the work effort that we have in 720. So it's not the reading of a layman in the street. You read the other information, and then you think about it, and then if you identify something, you say something. What is very important in what we have done in this part is that we are fully aware of the issues that were brought to the attention of the IAASB in the post-implementation monitoring of 720. And we know that what is very difficult to implement in practice is the part of 720 that deals with information that is not available at the date of the audit report. So where you have to try to guess and agree with the client what will come and when and read it later. And even in the report for listed entities, in the audit report, you have to say that when you will receive the other information, you will read it. And if you see something, you will say something. So that's the really difficult part of 720. And here we are in a different world. We are dealing with sustainability information. Things are evolving very fast. So it's very difficult to anticipate where what will be the other information after the date of the assurance report. So we focused the requirement on the other information that we obtain up to the date of the assurance report. So that's the easiest part. You can agree what you will get, can read it, document it, issue your report, and it's done. We have also reporting considerations on other information. We will have a look at the reporting considerations in part 9. in our discussion about reporting. It's addressed in paragraph 12 and 13 of part 9. So sorry for this long introduction. I thought it was important to set the scene and explain the thinking of the task force in landing where we are. And now I propose that we move to the next slide. And have a look at paragraph 18 to 23 and related application material. Thank you.
Okay. Comments. Maybe while people are raising their hand, I had a comment. I followed everything you said, Isabel, well. I also note in my outreach, this is an area that continuously arises. I wonder around the table, it may be really evident to practitioners that that's what we're trying to convey. But I also worry whether we're explicit enough at times in the knowing where people are going to be looking for on this, and whether, I don't know if it's a combination of more explicitly along the lines of your explanation, or maybe this third part in terms of educational materials about practical examples of how this will play out. For example, net zero commitments that are made. And that's where a lot of the investors that we've heard from said, well, they're making net zero commitments, but actually both the financials and other statements aren't consistent with that. And if you run the models, and so how do we deal with it? So I don't know whether it's a combination in my mind of more explicit language in the application material or explicit examples and part of educational material, but I am certain this will achieve a lot of scrutiny and has been, particularly from a user perspective, a place where there will be focusing on, particularly in the context of greenwashing and otherwise. So that was just my initial reaction. And as you said, nothing you said caused me trouble. I wish it always were said like that a little bit more in the application material. Okay, Sue was up.
Thanks, Tom. And I think actually you said pretty much what I was going to say. I think Isabel, your explanation was excellent. I had a lot of questions. I'm actually very grateful Dan spent a few minutes with me last night working through my outpouring of, well, what about in this situation? What about in that situation? What do you expect people to read? So I think your suggestion of putting some examples or something in, I think it really does bring it to light. So that was sort of one side. I thought that was really helpful. The other question I have, which is already a question in relation to other information with financial reports anyway, is around the whole kind of timeline and access to information piece, and just a reflection that if we're now building in a sustainability practitioner into the equation, I was just thinking through the practicalities of how you get the information from one person to another within tight timelines, and reflecting that some of the information in the financial statements is going to be price sensitive, for example. There isn't a solution for that, I'm afraid, but it's maybe something to reflect on in perhaps the tone of the sort of the guidance, the application material or whatever that we have. So I think that was it. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe to react to what has been said so far. Yeah, I fully agree, but I think the best way to make people understand what we mean is to provide an example like the one on climate or some other. Regarding the access to information, maybe something we could look at is also in the engagement letter. We have not included something specific on other information in the engagement letter, and maybe it's something we will look at with the task force, because probably it's something that should be agreed quite early in the assurance engagement. What will be the other information, and that we will get it on time.
Okay, Sachiko?
Thank you. Similar view from me as well. I also receive a lot of question and comment with particularly with regard to the connectivity. What is the what is the special consideration if the auditor with financial statement also audit the assure on the sustainability information, and also what is the additional special consideration if it's different practitioners. And I also think that some flavor in this standard is also needed, and maybe some practical examples I help. And thank you very much, Isabel, for your explanation is very, very helpful. And so maybe this is very, very important thing that we need to not only doing this standard, but also we need to keep in mind that what we need to do in the future as well. That's all from me. Thank you.
Koichi?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Isabel, for the explanation. And also, I echo Tom's comment about importance of the connectivity. From the IOSCO's standpoint, connectivity is very important. And also, we are really careful about this is a professional agnostic standard, and assurance provider would not have the experience of financial statements audit. And we really want to have the specific guidance to support in this situation. Assurance provider doesn't have the financial statements audit, but still have the quality assurance for this connectivity field. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Julie?
Thank you. And Isabel, I'm in complete agreement that you've excluded the piece around that's in 720 regarding the information to be received in the future, if I can call it that. I think that's complicated enough in the context of a financial statement audit. So I appreciate that you didn't include that piece here. A couple of things on 18A, I wonder if the way it's currently worded is a quite broad scope of information. As you pointed out in 720, we've kind of ring fenced it at least to the annual report so that the auditor in that case has some steer as to where they should be looking for this other information to be able to read it and understand it and determine if there's a material inconsistency. But I don't know if we've given some steer enough in 18A at the way it's worded at the moment. It sounds very broad. And then I was listening to your explanation, and I just want to confirm something, because you mentioned that other information when you're performing a sustainability engagement could be the financial statements. But I'm just questioning that because in 720 in paragraph A5, the reverse is not true. So when you're doing a financial statement audit, we scope out sustainability reports in the context of an annual report. So I'm just wondering why the reverse is true when you're performing a sustainability engagement. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Julie. I want to respond to your two last points. So you say why 18A does not restrict to the concept of annual report. So annual report works well with the financial, but for sustainability information, maybe the sustainability information that was subject to your assurance engagement will be included in a sustainability report that will have additional information, that will be other information, and it will not be called an annual report. So I don't want to restrict that to annual report because it's an association standard. You don't want to be associated with misleading information.
Sorry, Isabel, I maybe wasn't clear. I wasn't saying restricted to the annual report. I was saying we need some sort of analogy like we did on the audit side to an annual report. We need to somehow steer practitioners to what this other information would be, because right now it just says will contain sustainability information, and that feels very broad to me. I wasn't saying say annual report. I was just saying something like what we did in 720 would be helpful.
Have you looked at A36, A36? And it's not sufficient. Okay, so we will have a look. And regarding the financial statements, so you mentioned that ISA 720 excludes sustainability report. It does, but it does only when sustainability reports are separate documents, not when it's part of the annual report.
Okay. Wendy?
Thank you, Tom. And Isabel, thank you, because that explanation was quite helpful because we had quite a bit of confusion in my reach out group. So I have far less comments, in fact, only to add on to some of the, because I agree with what has been said. One of my comments was we have to look at the engagement letter, which you already said, but also the rep letter I wanted to add. And I'm very much in favor of the examples because I have to say, I don't even think auditors sometimes with 720 actually know what other information is or what they need to do or what's relevant. Thank you.
Wendy, just to clarify, did you mean rep letter or engagement letter? Both, thank you.
Eric?
Thanks, Tom. I had very similar comments to Julie. Agree with the exclusion of the future information. That's been a major hurdle with the financial statement audit. So I agree that that would be a bridge too far in the sustainability information space. Have had very similar concerns raised around the ring fencing of the information that will need to be covered. And, you know, as I was listening to the explanation, which I found very helpful, Isabel, I mean, I was trying to put myself in the position of a practitioner that's doing a very small part of a very large sustainability report and trying to determine whether something is a consistency or inconsistency with the work I've done. I mean, I think on the financial statement side, it's a bit difficult enough, but at least you've got numbers and quantitative disclosures, whereas I think that must be a very challenging process to go through, and I'm just wondering if we're going to need quite a bit of help to practitioners in sort of identifying what a consistency would, an inconsistency would look like.
Probably it will be a consideration in the acceptance of the engagement, because you have to understand if what you are doing will be relevant and how it will be perceived by the stakeholders. And if it's just to associate your name with very big document on which you have performed nothing, probably that's an engagement that you are going not to accept. Maybe you will ask the information to be extracted from this information and provide assurance only on that. I don't know.
And my last point was just similar to Sashiko about the connectivity with the financial statement audit and whether there are different considerations depending on whether you are or are not the auditor. I had the similar questions come to me. Thanks.
Thank you. Ada?
Thank you. Yeah, so I guess I echo a bit or quite a bit that's been discussed before. And yes, your explanation was helpful, Isabel, but it's just the words that trip me up a bit. So when it says the documents or documents expected to be issued and to be issued in future, well, does that entirely take away that other document that may be issued that will contain sustainability information, which can be a relatively broad definition? And I'm thinking of the example where the entity is making a sustainability information report where assurance is provided on, and it's separate from the financial statements. But the financial statements in their MD&A will also have sustainability information. So is there something to be done there? I think not. And I wonder whether we could make the definition a little bit more precise in the sense that it is all the information that gets issued alongside the subject matter information and our assurance report. That will take away those other documents that may get issued in the future. And it will provide further clarity, particularly for the non-practitioners. Yeah, that's so wondering whether we can be more precise in the I'm confused by document or documents. So I think it is typically one document where it all goes out in, and that determines the scope. Thank you.
Guess the question is where do you draw the line? From what I hear, when I hear the comments from IAASB and others, a very narrow limitation here or scoping out will probably fall short of investor expectations. And that was sort of what I was driving at when I hear. And so I don't know how we draw the line yet, but I think we have to be careful maybe about expectations. And we heard about expectations gap yesterday, but there probably needs to be some clarity reached here in that regard. I guess I get worried, Ada, that it may, maybe I misunderstood some of what you said, but statements associated with financial statements to be totally out may be troublesome.
And I would agree with that. But this is also an element of the reporting frameworks around this, that this shouldn't necessarily be reported in isolation. It is part of the entity's ecosystem and their reporting on the affairs. So should this be allowed to be reported separately? Probably not, in my view, but we do need to put some practical barriers around what are we including in that scope.
Got it. So I don't know if we have the exact answer today, but we've gotten a lot of comments about the interconnectivity. And maybe this is the abstractness of some of the text today that we need to add some of the sort of actually, how does this play out when the rubber meets the road? And we do know where it is playing out in the actual real world today, and maybe we don't want to be limited by that, but we're hearing comments from regulators and investors on real questions. Isabel, any reactions?
I want to thank everybody for their comments. I'm very happy about your comments because they all go in a direction that is about providing clarity on what is the work effort on the connectivity. And we have heard yesterday from the standard setter how important it is. So we will have to work with the task force in order to take on board all the comments we received. I just want to go back on what has been said on the engagement letter, which I started to introduce the idea, and also the rep letter. We have to keep in mind that sometimes there will be no other information. If it's a very simple engagement that just give you a statement, you issue a report on it, it will not be included in anything. So sometimes you will have no other information and it will just be not applicable. Thank you, everybody.
Could I make a brief comment, Tom, in response to some of the comments about what that other information might look like? And I just wanted to, I guess, remind the board that, of course, we're trying to accommodate such a wide range of different types of engagements. We're not just looking at the future scenario under CSRD, for example, where there's going to be a full sustainability report coupled with a
within the annual report. So we are looking, we're trying to accommodate also regulatory requirements around the world for emissions reporting or voluntary engagements for just individual KPIs that, and what is, the more narrow the engagement, the less likely it is to have a lot of other information at the time that you issue the assurance report. And as we get closer to the full sustainability report aligned within the annual report, we'll see that other information will become much more relevant. Because that will be available more likely at the time of the assurance report is signed. I don't know if that helps clarification.
Okay, thank you. Josephine, were you about to come in? No, okay. I think we can move on to the next section.
So next section is section about forming the assurance conclusion, and it will be presented by Claire.
Claire, could I just ask, you was a little faint on your last intervention. If you could get closer to the microphone when you speak. I know that the laptop is somewhat in the way.
Sure, okay. Let me just flag if I'm too quiet again. Is that, am I? Oh, okay. Yeah, sure, no problem at all. Okay. All right, I'm closer now. Hopefully that's better. Sorry about that. Okay, so we're going to talk, I'll just give you a little bit of introduction for forming an assurance conclusion. Now, we have brought in, this is a new section. You haven't seen this before, just to clarify. We have brought in requirements that were previously in part 4. Now, I think that I just wanted to highlight that because I know there's been some comments in this part 8 around the geography of requirements. So I really want to flag that what we've done is we brought in, they're now requirements 24 and 25 on evaluating the evidence. We brought that in from part 4. So we're talking there, we are wanting to link the evaluation of the evidence with then the conclusion. So we brought in there that requirement, evaluating the evidence obtained, evaluation, of the sufficiency and appropriateness of the evidence necessary to form a conclusion. And then we go on, this leads in then to requirements 26 and 27, where the practitioner considers the sufficiency and appropriateness of that evidence and whether uncorrected misstatements of material, individually or aggregate. And then it flows on again to paragraph 28, in the circumstance where the practitioner is unable to obtain sufficient appropriate evidence and a scope limitation exists, as well as requirements that we brought in paragraph 29 and 30, which are more around, we brought in from ISO 220, which are around final determinations in the overall responsibility for managing and achieving quality and documenting that. So paragraph 29 and 30 are very much related to part 2 on quality management, and part 20, paragraphs 24 to 28 are very much around that, evaluating the evidence and concluding on the sufficiency and appropriateness of that. So passing over to discussion on paragraph 24 to 30.
Okay. I'm hoping precedent, we're not jumping back and say that we need to move it back to part 4, but that has been the precedent of the week. If I've learned very much, but
Thank you. My comments relate to paragraph 24, Claire, and I sort of the first observation we had was maybe in the order. Because the C1 says when the practitioner has used work of a practitioner's external expert. So that is all part of the evaluate the evidence in A. So maybe reverse that order. And then the other comment I had was in respect of A as well as C, because both sit at the 500 level of the intended purpose of the procedure. And I think here we're at the overall, we're not looking here at the procedure, but whether the overall body of work has been sufficient to support the conclusion. So I would prefer to go back closer to 3000 and take out the and work around the intended purpose of the procedure. Thank you.
Was smiling there. So I thought maybe it was a point of discussion.
No,
but,
I'm always smiling. So
that is true. Any other comments here? So maybe a reaction.
Yeah, thanks very much, Edo. And we will go away and look at the order that you mentioned in paragraph 24, and also look more closely at this wording around intended purpose versus the evaluation of the evidence, and check that against. We've very much drawn on the ED 500 here, so we'll compare 500 and 3000, and the task force can have a look at that. Thank you very much.
Okay. Great job. That concludes part 8. So we're really in the home stretch of this draft. Josephine?
Yes, and we're up to the preparation of the assurance report now. And again, Isabel and Claire.
thank you. In fact, I was smiling on purpose, because when I saw that there were few comments on the previous part, I anticipated that we will jump to reporting quite soon, and reporting is my baby. I asked to be part of this team to work on reporting, and why that? Because reporting is very important, because it's the public part of what the practitioner has performed. So you may have performed thousands, hundreds, thousands of hours. At the end of the day, the only thing that the public will see is what you have in your report. So it's very important. And as I was also at that time a technical advisor to the board, at the time we worked with Dan on the evolution of the audit report. So we developed a lot of thinking on many things. But as you know, there have been no conforming change to the enhancement we made to the auditor's report to 3000. So now that's what we need to do. Look at what was done in the audit report at the time we changed the audit report, and see if it's relevant, if it's strong enough to be incorporated into ISA 5000. So this part 9, deals, of course, with both limited and reasonable assurance. Maybe we will need to split the requirements at some point, or better signpost what is for limited, what is for reasonable. It has not been done with columnar format as this stage, but you will find all the content. As you know, we are planning to share with you quite soon report example. We are planning to have a report example for reasonable assurance. We are planning to have a report example for limited assurance. We are planning also, because we know it's common in practice, to have a report example for hybrid. What I call hybrid is you have part limited, part reasonable assurance. This part, also part 9, deals both with a fair presentation framework and compliance framework. So we had a discussion with the task force to see whether fair presentation framework was worth dealing with. Does it exist? Yes, it will exist, because IAASB is a fair presentation framework. So we need to have development on the fair presentation framework, and so you will find them. And what you find in this part, of course, is the minimum basic content of a report. There's also something very important in this part, is that we deal with over-reporting responsibility. That's absolutely key, especially for the discussions that are going on right now in Europe, where we know that the practitioner will have also to report on compliance with digital taxonomy, and will have to report on compliance with green taxonomy. So that's something additional that the practitioner has to do. And so we have a place for the practitioner to be able to do that and report on that. Now I want to go back to the way we developed this part. So what did we do? We looked at ISAE 3000 revised. We looked at ISAE 3410, but as I said, they have been revised and developed before the change of the audit report. And we looked also at EER. And you're all aware that in EER, something absolutely great has been done, is that in the EER guidance, we have two report examples. We have a reasonable one and a limited one. And maybe you remember that at the time we did EER, we already restructured the assurance report with the format of the audit report. So we have a conclusion first, for example. So this was already done in EER, and we know it has been very well received. So now let me go back to what, to me, were the four major enhancements that we did in the audit report project. What would you say if someone was asking you what were the major enhancements that the new audit report made? We could make a quiz, but we don't have time. So I would say first, the new structure of the report with the conclusion first. Second, key audit matters. Third, reporting on work performed on other information. And four, identification of the engagement partner in the audit report. To me, that's the four major enhancements that we did in the auditor's reporting project. So again, structure of the report, key audit matter, other information, and identification of the engagement partner. So now I will cover with you the discussions we had with the task force on these four topics, and now we landed in part 9. So let's start by the new structure of the report with the conclusion first. As I said, it was already done. It was already done in the example that we provided in the EER guidance. We received very positive feedback on these examples. So we decided to keep this revised structure. And what we are proposing in part 9 is the new structure where we mandate the conclusion to be first. Then there's no mandatory order for the other part of the report, as in ISA 700, but what is mandated is to have the conclusion first. Now let's move to another very interesting topic, another one that I really like, key audit matter. So we started discussing with the task force whether we should have in the report key sustainability assurance matter. And when we started thinking at that, we thought that if we think at that, it should be the same scope in the audit report. So it should be for reasonable assurance, because audit deals with reasonable assurance, and it should be for listed. So that was the starting point of our thinking. But then we had the advantage of having done very recently a post-implementation review of the audit report, where the IAASB went to many stakeholders worldwide and has asked questions on the new audit report. And among these questions, there was one: should we include key audit matters in assurance standard? The question was explicitly raised to the respondents, and you find that in agenda item 4. The answer was no, it's not relevant to include key audit matter in the assurance report. So the task force concluded that based on this post-implementation review, we would not include any requirement in the draft standard that we are presenting to you today to have key, let's call them key sustainability assurance matter. There could have been a value to that. It could have been a value in differentiating the format of a report for limited assurance and for reasonable assurance. But again, we have very recent feedback. There has been a structured due process to collect that feedback. And the feedback we had so far was, no, let's not do that. However, it is my understanding that a lot of people are asking this question. This question was even raised, Josephine, at the board, at the CAG, sorry. So Josephine, I think you, but I will let you say what you proposed to the CAG.
Thank you as well. Yes. So you may recall when we started this, I went through some of the CAG comments, but one of the things that was raised was our approach to CAMs. And I did reiterate the feedback that we got from the post-implementation review and that there was no appetite to include those in assurance reports. However, given that there was interest raised by CAG members in respect to CAMs, and rather than shut it down at that stage, we did agree that perhaps the best way forward was actually to raise it in the explanatory memorandum, explain our rationale for not including it in the standard, but of course ask the question from our stakeholders whether they believe we wanted to pursue that further. Thank you. Thanks, Isabel.
So then moving to the next enhancement, which is the reporting on work performed on other information. So you will find that in part 9, in paragraph 12 and 13. That have been taken from 720. And last but not least, it's the identification of the engagement partner, but here we call the engagement leader. And so we also discussed that at length with the task force, and we discussed that based on the feedback we had on what we did on the audit report, there was a value in mirroring the requirements we have for audit. It has been discussed at length at that time, that it's public interest. Remember, the requirement in audit report to have identification of the engagement partner is only for listed. So here it's also only for listed. So we believe that if a listed company published an annual report in which you have both an audit report with where you can identify the name of the engagement partner, it would be inconsistent if you have an assurance report on sustainability information due to the connectivity of sustainability information with the financial statement, not to have the same ability to identify the name of the engagement leader. So we are proposing a requirement to identify the name of the engagement leader for listed companies. So now you know where we landed on the 4 major announcements we made to the audit report, what we decided to do, new structure, key sustainability assurance matter, raise it in the explanatory memorandum, reporting on other information, it's done in part 9, identification of the engagement leader for listed companies, it's done in part 9. So sorry, again, it was a little bit long, but I thought it was important to set the scene because it's the first time you're seeing this part. And now back to you.
Thank you.
Do you want me to note, Tom, for you? Oh, well, they can see it on the screen, I guess.
Yeah. So let's tackle paragraphs 1 to 3 and related application material first. 1 to 3D.
Yes, thanks.
Kai.
Thanks, Tom and Isabel. Again, thanks very much for the helpful introduction. I have a brief comment relating to paragraph 3, little c, little 5. It seems to me that in line with ISA 700 and to prevent preempting the opinion in the description of the sustainability information being assured, the identification of the applicable criteria should take place in the expression of the conclusion as part of little 8. That's all. Thanks.
Sachika.
Thank you. I have 2 comments on this area. First one is on paragraph A, 10L, and A, 11R. It's expression of the conclusion, particularly on small b on 18L and 11R. It's about the guidance when the conclusion is expressed in terms of the statement made by the appropriate party. And maybe I'm wrong, but I'm not sure it really applies to sustainability assurance engagement. In my mind, inclusion of this guidance will create unnecessary complexity. So in my mind, maybe they are not necessary. And my second comment is on paragraph 3, small d, small 4. It's about basis for conclusion. It's kind of question and comment. The paragraph 3, small d and small 4 says you need to state whether the practitioner believes that the evidence the practitioner has obtained is sufficient and appropriate. And I was not able to find relevant wording neither in the 3410 and also 3000, as well as illustrative example reports in 3410 and also ISRS 340 to 400 for the limited assurance engagement. I totally understand that the concept of sufficiency and appropriateness is also applicable for limited assurance engagement, but I think there should be some reason, maybe not to, confuse the differences between limited and reasonable. So maybe we need to think about what was the reason for not using that word in current report, and also consider whether it is really needed. That's my comment. Thank you.
Sue?
Thanks. Isabel, I'm looking forward to seeing the example reports once they come, because I think this will put a lot of flavour into what the requirements will look like. One of the concerns that came up in some of the outreach was making sure that we don't end up with kind of split level opinions on different kinds of information where that's not intended. And particularly if maybe if you've got multiple limited assurance being built up together. So I think seeing how that works will be interesting to just sort of look in with that kind of lens. I have a number of questions in this section about how the requirements and actually some of the very specific wording we've used works in your hybrid report example. Because I think the wording that we've got comes directly from reasonable assurance. And I mean, the first example that I've got is here in 3C1 little 1b, where we talk about the title being prefixed by something, and I was trying to work through if you got a hybrid position whether prefix was the right word. The same kind of concern comes up when I'm thinking later on about modifications in reports. If you've got a modification in a limited report and how that impacts the reasonable assurance. So I probably won't raise it again there. I think it's just consideration of how these things apply in that kind of hybrid situation, and particularly if there is perhaps some kind of modification in there. Thanks.
Maybe I can try to answer to the first comments. So Kayuva, yes, we will look at the location of this paragraph. Sashiko, regarding your comment on A10L, A10R, I think we will turn to people that are used to doing this sustainability assurance engagement in order to understand if it does happen in real life. Of course, this paragraph, for example, they work very well when we report on internal control. So we will turn to you, Neil, and to some of other people used to do this assurance report to see if it's relevant, and if it's not helping and does not happen in real life, probably we should remove it. Thanks for your comments on some wording that may be perceived as dealing only with reasonable assurance. It's true that we borrowed a lot of drafting from ISA 700, So we will go back to that, reconsider it, and it may be some of the paragraph where we will have differential wording for limited and reasonable assurance. But like you, I would be interested to know in the history, and maybe I will turn back to Wolf and Susan to understand why some words were different or were not used in one and were used in the other. So it's always very interesting. So regarding the hybrid, so yes, we have not really maybe adjusted the requirement to the hybrid situation. Maybe we did a different requirement for hybrid. I think we will be able to build that when we will develop the report. However, I have to say that we have a lot of real-life example of such hybrid reports. So we will not build something from nothing. We will build from a real-life experience of report, see how they work. There's always the solution to have a report with two parts, but the risk is that you would have a lot of duplication. But we have to see. We have to see the words on paper and see how it looks like, and looking forward to bring back to you next time.
Okay. Julie?
Thank you. And thanks, Isabel, for the very, very helpful scene setting. I think that those were really helpful clarification. I just want to reflect very, very quickly a little bit on the discussion around key audit matters. And I think the decision seems to hinge on the response that we receive from that post-implementation review. And which is fair, but at the same time, I think we need to sort of maybe remind ourselves that that was done like late 2020 and maybe to early 2021. It doesn't seem a long time ago, but I think at that time when people are looking at 3000, looking at 3410, they may not have in their mind that whole excitement around sustainability reporting yet. IAASB, I think, wasn't formed even at that time. So things were brewing, but we are not at the forefront of that sustainability reporting as we are now. So the perception may change. So absolutely agree with what Josephine has suggested in terms of flagging that in the explanatory memorandum and then getting specific response in the consultation. But I think also to that, because like everyone else, when I do my little bit of outreach, I do also get a sense that this is an area that people are really interested in. And it is in the context of the communicative value of the report, especially in the area of a corporate reporting that is evolving and the practice that is evolving. So they feel that this is especially important in that context, and therefore to take this away, I think absolutely we need to find what people are thinking. I guess the slight little concern is, we know we are working on a really tight timeline, and we want our standard to be available for use by end of next year. So if we do go out without a sort of key audit matters concept, and then assuming we come back with sufficient interest that requires us to rethink our decision, will that sort of cause a problem in terms of the timeline in delivery? So that's something which, again, I don't have an answer, but I thought I'll just put to the task force for consideration, please. Thanks.
On this question, I guess when I think about enhancements to reporting, I think it was intentional that this was not one of the 6 priority areas. And it seems to me like we're going to consult on what next too. And part of me, the way I think about some of even if people said they want key audit matters, I sort of think that it would be maybe a separate standard that would follow at a later date. But that's just my point of view. As well, but that was a design choice that we made up front. Vili and then Janine.
I think, Tom, you've started what I wanted to say, because I think we also need to remember here we are on a journey. And this is an overarching standard. And I think it's baby steps at the moment. I think there's a maturity curve involved in terms of the maturity of reporting frameworks, entities, and even users. And I think it's in the context of that. So I'm with Tom in the sense that, you know, we did say that we anticipate down the line a suite of standards. And I think this is a candidate topic for that. But agree, as Josephine said, this came up at CAG as well. So it's good that we put it in the explanatory memorandum.
Janine?
Thank you. Yes, I have a slightly different perspective because I think key audit matters could particularly be very helpful in the beginning years of also of sustainability assurance, because of also the different nature of sustainability information, more judgmental areas. So it would provide maybe the practitioners with also opportunity to flag things that they found difficult, or areas, or how they dealt with certain things. And that is, of course, also very relevant to users of sustainability information. So I appreciate, of course, that as was being said and proposed, to put it in the explanatory memorandum, to flag it there, to explicitly ask for input when exposing the exposure draft. But yeah, you could also, of course, put the CAM in the exposure draft, and then ask for whether that is something that the stakeholders like to have. It's just, yeah, I personally would go for the latter, because I think it's for the users a very important area, in particular because this is so brand new. Thank you.
Dan?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. And maybe just to add a little bit more color to the nature of the task force discussions on this particular point, because as Isabel mentioned earlier, the task force did have a fairly robust conversation about this. And Isabel mentioned that the task force acknowledged the potential benefit to the communication of key audit matters, but there were a couple of other things that the task force talked about that maybe didn't come through in the issues paper. Chun-Wee, to your point, the issues paper seemed to at least suggest that the primary, maybe the only consideration for the task force decision was the results of the post-implementation review. Two other things that the task force talked about that were important. One is the task force talked about the sheer number of engagements that would be coming online in this area with a new standard, different reporting frameworks, different laws and regulations, and is it better for practitioners to focus on performing the engagement properly, focus on the quality of the engagement in coming to a conclusion, the appropriate assurance conclusion, and then think later about communication of other matters, like communication of key audit matters, as Tom and Billy mentioned, in a separate standard. Related to that, the other thing the task force talked about is if CAM were to be included in this exposure draft, ISO 701 is a completely separate standard that has a lot of requirements and application material to guide auditors in terms of how to identify and communicate key audit matters, and how much of that would need to be brought into this standard in order to support the communication of CAM. There was another reason why the task force concluded that perhaps it was better left for down the line as a separate standard.
Dan, I think in terms of whatever, say we stay where our current position is, I think that explanation and the potential reflecting on where this audit side is, we would have to suggest like this is the reason it would not be part of an overarching standard and something to potentially follow on. That whole discussion should be in, because my observation is that we could continue to say that clearly could have use value for users at any stage of the development in terms of assurance reporting. The question we made up front were some prioritization decisions about getting as much of an overarching standard out that would be helpful to the market by a particular point of time, knowing that we would have to come back to something else. I still find that viewpoint persuasive. Personally, I guess I have to ask the board whether they have a different point of view, or you're content with effectively the approach of acknowledging this would be a nice to have, reflecting on where we are because of the explanation of Dan and Billy, me, and Isabel gave, but flagging it in an explanatory memorandum as either a potential change to this standard or a future project going forward. I guess by show of hands, who's happy with that current position?
Maybe I wanted to add an idea before that. In paragraph 11, little b, we have the possibility to include other matter. So anyone wanting to communicate key audit matters will have the possibility to do so, probably by using the other matter section. So it's not prohibited to disclose key other matter. It's not that we have not built requirement and application material around it, but still a practitioner can communicate key audit matters without breaking any of the requirement of this part. Thank you.
Koichi, do you want to come in on this point?
Thank you very much. One JFSA comment and one IOSCO comment. And in terms of the CAM, internally in JFSA, we discussed, we fully understand Janine's point about transparency for investors. At the same time, it should be professional agnostic standard, and it can be really challenging for the other assurance provider for CAM in the beginning of the this practice. So I think it's very important to have the good outreach to the other assurance providers if they're able to perform or not. So that's one point from the JFSA perspective. And another point is from the IOSCO perspective. Transparency is the one of the three important subject which IOSCO identified in the last September's statement. And particularly what we hear is that which item is assured is sometimes very unclear and very confusing for users. And I understand that paragraph A7, the second bullet point is addressing the situation that if the sustainability information subject to assurance is not the entire sustainability information, transparency could be added. I appreciate this paragraph. At the same time, when we create the illustrative example for the next board meeting, I think it would be appreciated if you address the complicated situation which is happening in the current practice and how to provide good transparency on this complicated situation. Certain items are already under assurance, but some of the narratives are not under assurance. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you for that comment. And on your last point, we also have a lot of real life example already, so we will be able to build on that. Thank you.
Okay. On this point, I think we should close this off on CAM, key assurance matters or whatever we would call it. But my sense around the room, and put Isabel's suggestion aside, the task force could consider that as a drafted suggestion as we get to that paragraph anyway. But really where we are is we're happy with the current position of the task force for the reasons described and actually enhanced by Koichi, to not formally include a CAM-like thing in our reporting requirements. Get input on it as part of the explanatory memorandum with an explanation of why, and also potentially pinpoint that even if not in this standard, it may be a priority follow-on topic in the 5,000 suite going forward. Does anyone object to that position? Okay. I think that's where we are as a board. We unanimous on that. So the next question becomes other comments on paragraphs 1 to 3D. I'll call on Wendy.
Thanks, Tom. Just two quick comments. Want to come back in on 3C5. I think it was the first comment that Kai made. And I don't know that it needs to be moved. I would suggest that it's just clear that there's a reference to where management, it identifies where management has included or referred to the location of the criteria and the sustainability information, that it's not the assurance provider. So am I in the right paragraph? 3C little 5. And then follow on to that, just a quick observation in A8, I think this came from someplace else, but it's missing the beginning because it starts in the middle of a sentence. So wherever it was taken from, which is paragraph A165, I think we're just missing the first piece.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Eric?
Thanks. Just one point to suggest the task force goes back to reconsider is in 3G part 2.
We're not up to 3G yet, right? We're 3 to 3D on this slide, I think. Okay.
My apologies.
No problem. Slightly complicated. We stopped in the middle of a number. We'll get to you. You're now first on the next batch. You've won that honor. Okay. Any other comments on this section? Josephine, Ada?
So maybe just a comment on 3C, Roman 5. Identifies applicable criteria, whether, etc. It's left me with a question. Well, do we now need to stipulate what the criteria are in the assurance report, which will be very difficult, particularly when it's entity developed criteria. So that was what was confusing me in that sense.
Ado, yes, that's right. And we've actually taken this from 3,000, so it's already there today. But we have had other comments on that, so we'll take those away and just have another noodle on it. Okay, thanks.
Okay, Isabel? Do you want to move on to the next section?
Yes, happy to move to the next section, please. Next slide. So now we are in 3E to 3L.
Eric, you've won.
All right. Such an important point. In 3G, 2B, it's been picked up from I think from 700 primarily, and it's suggesting that the auditor, the practitioner's responsibilities shall state that A or B. And I just wondered if this really works in a sustainability assurance environment where we're dealing with specific generally we would be dealing with identified frameworks which would be covered under A, but I'm just not sure how B would work, where it says provide a definition or description of materiality in accordance with the applicable criteria. And I'm not sure why the practitioner would have to do that. in that context. So just asking you to reconsider that one. Thanks.
Yeah, that's something we will have a look when we will develop the paragraph on double materiality, because I think it's exactly one of the places where we may have to describe what is materiality in some specific criteria. Thank you, Eric.
Okay, Sachika.
Thank you. I have two comments on paragraph 3G. First one is small one, similar to my previous comment. I'm not sure whether this statement is also applicable to limited assurance engagement. So maybe either venue task force can take a look at that. And also small 2, with regard to materiality, I also have similar view with Eric. I get a view that it is not very clear how to apply this requirement. So maybe some clarification is needed. Thank you.
Okay, Kai.
Thanks, Tom. As Eric and Sachiko have a very similar comment to paragraph 3, little g, little 2. It's to be unusual because it goes beyond what is required in ISA 700 and may confuse readers, in my view, because they might confuse materiality as practitioner use with concepts like double materiality, which are not really related to materiality. I therefore suggest that G little 2 be deleted, or as Sachiko has mentioned, more helpful comments. Then I have a second comment regarding paragraph 3, little g, little 4. In line with ISA 700, I believe we should add a requirement to this paragraph about not understanding internal control for the purpose of expressing an opinion on internal controls, unless that is required as described in the circumstances set forth in ISA 700. And then I have a comment referring to the application material, and therefore to A18. It's included. Yes, it's included. I also think we need to add something in the application material about the reliability or lack of it of information obtained with respect to scope 3 reporting. That means from the upstream and downstream supply chain outside the corporate group, because it is generally recognized that information from outside the corporate group cannot be subjected to the same procedure regarding reliability by management as for information with the corporate group. I would also like to add application material that addresses the fact that this section of the report may also clarify that the inherent limitation described in the section on management's responsibilities are also inherent limitations on the assurance engagement. Users may otherwise believe that practitioners can overcome the inherent limitations and measurement of evaluation. Thanks, that's all.
Any other comments on this section? I think we're done with the comments on 3. So clearly you said you're going to look at 3G2. You got a few comments on that, and you got some suggestions from Kai.
Yes, and also some comments on whether some wording applies also to limited assurance. So we will have a close look at that. We know that often devil is in the details, and we have to reconsider maybe some of the words. Thanks, Kayuva, for your suggestions. We will have to find the right balance between what we put in in the requirement what we put in application material, but probably we can borrow fix from 3410 on scope 3 and see if you have an example of the inherent limitation or also an inherent limitation for the practitioner. So if you could share it with the task force, we will consider it. We have to be careful not to have a lot of disclaimer in the report because we know it's not well perceived, but we will try to see what we can do in the example.
Please proceed.
So next slide, please. So now we are still in part 9, requirement 4 to requirement 9, please.
Okay, 4 to 9. No comments at 4 to 9?
So no comments. So I take it as being an agreement from the board at what we did on the disclosure of the name of the engagement leader, which is in part 4. So you all agree with in agreement with it? Great. Thank you.
So let me just make sure that we feel like this area is currently closed off right now. Okay. Let the record note that. I'll be surprised if we get comments come next board meeting on paragraphs 4 to 9. I'll make a special note of it.
So moving to next slide, please. So now we are in 10L to 19, which is up to the end of part 9. Taking your comment on this section. So you have the unmodified conclusion, the emphasis of matter, the other matter, the other information. So the reporting paragraph we mentioned, I referred to when we were discussing with the part on other information in part 8. We have the modified conclusion. And last but not least, comparative information. Up to you.
The rest, in other words. Okay, Guy.
Thanks, Tom. And let me first of all mention, very impressed how we go through these requirements and application material so that we are so in advance. That's a great job so far. I have a brief comment, Isabel, referring to paragraph 10L, 10R. If we intend to differentiate between compliance and fair presentation framework, in my view, we need to include the definitions thereof from ISA 200 in the definitions section. Furthermore, the link between the term framework and criteria needs to be established. That's all from my side. Thanks very much again.
Thank you. Diane?
Thank you. My comment is on the comparative information, and it's not so much what you've got here in paragraphs 18 and 19, but it made me pause and go back to reporting. And if you have a situation where you're showing information side by side, but yet the auditor is only taking responsibility for the year, I'm not sure I recall seeing something in reporting to be explicit that their opinion does not extend to the prior period if they're not taking responsibility for it. So if you can just noodle on that, it just caused me to rethink about the reporting. Thank you.
So I just want to try to understand the point of Diane. Does it mean that you want a requirement to include something in the report?
Yeah, so I think under US, we would typically, and I'm showing my US hat, you would be very clear that the auditor's opinion does not extend, and then we would actually use those words. So I'm not sure.
But we don't have that in ISA 700 either.
Okay, so is there any risk that it will be inferred? That's my only question. I leave it to the technical.
Yeah, we will discuss with the task force, but in the ISAs, that's not the way it's done. And often it's dealt with in the law. In fact, that's the law that says you report on the last period or you report on both. But we will discuss. Thank you.
Okay. Sashika?
Thank you. Two comments. One is on paragraph 17. Similar to my previous comment, it's again talking about when the conclusion is expressed in terms of statement made by the appropriate party. So maybe task force can take a look at whether it is needed. Particularly, I think this requirement is very, very difficult to understand for all assurance engagement provider. And also a small comment on paragraph A51. The second sentence says, ordinarily, the disclosure presented in sustainability information measures or evaluate sustainability information for a discrete period and are not based on the cumulative disclosure over time. I think it applied to GHG information, but not sure whether we can say ordinarily for sustainability information as a whole. So maybe you can take a look at the wordings. Thank you.
Yes, Sachiko, thank you. And thank you also for having shared this comment in advance. You are absolutely right that we have taken this application paragraph from ISAE 3410 and that it's in a different context. Maybe what we can try, and I will share that with the task force, is replace ordinarily by, for example, and replace are not based, may not be based, and replace all the present tense by may, and then it would apply to the situation to which it applies only. Thank you.
Okay. Ada?
So I had similar comment as Diane had, and next to piling onto it, because we or in what I see is that if the previous or if the comparative information was not subject to any assurance engagement, we would make that clear. And I think the same will apply if your scope changes. So if the previous year was a limited assurance engagement and you go to a reasonable assurance engagement, I think that needs to be delineated as well, or at least a suggestion done that it would be picked up in other matters. Thank you.
Okay, so we have got something in the application material that explains this. So if you look at A53, it says if it's presented, but some of that is not covered by the practitioner's conclusion, it's important that the status of such information is clearly identified. So we have it in the application material. So what might be helpful to us is to take away as a task force, is it sufficient there? Or do you want to go above and beyond what we have currently in our standards and have an actual requirement associated with this, elevating it essentially?
Yeah, and I think the phrase "the status of such information," I'm not really sure what that means. I mean, audited, not audited, subject to review, right? So if you could just take a look at that.
So, but leave it in the application material.
That's fine. I'm okay
Okay.
in the application material. Yep.
Perfect. Thank you.
It's maybe one place that the passive voice confuses the matter a little bit. My pet issue. Okay. Any other comments on the reporting section? Oh, sorry, Greg.
Thanks, Tom. Just on the comparative information, so I think I flagged yesterday a query as to whether it was broad enough by just focusing on the prior period information and whether it should also include things like targets for greenhouse gas emission reduction targets, etc. It depends how we deal with that as to whether this is a problem here or not, but to what extent does the auditor have an obligation to audit target type information? Presumably none, but we need to be clear in here.
Yeah, so we are not dealing with audit of targets, of course, but we have to obtain evidence about the commitments that are explained in the sustainability information. Maybe I hand over to Claire.
I think really Greg's point's really important, and we probably need to go away and look at how we're addressing that in the way we described comparative information, because if there's prior year targets, performance against targets that are then changed in this year, then you've got that same comparative situation. So, and certainly depends on the framework as to whether what we're assuring in relation to targets definitely depend on that framework. But I think it's a very valid point. I think it's something we can take away. Thank you.
And regarding comparative information, it's not an easy topic to deal with because we're used in the financial statements. And in the financial statements, usually it's very clear how you correct previous year information. So you can correct for error and you have to disclose. If you look at current draft standards, it's not clear at all how you correct previous year information. We understand that in some of this framework, you can change anything, probably without disclosing it. So it's not so clear right now. So we also need to have a look at the current draft framework and see how they deal with that and if our requirements and application material are fit for purpose to this new standards. Thank you.
So to all of that, we have got quite a bit of very useful guidance in 710. So I think in 710. So I think ISA 710. So I think what we probably need to do, along with other comments that Diane and Ada have raised, we'll just have a look at what we have material there. And I think some of that will actually address some of your concerns as well. Thank you.
Okay, any other remarks on reporting? Josephine, you want to bring us to a good close here?
Right, so if we could have the next slide, please. This is what I always call the anything else. Thank you for all the comments. I felt like over the last day or so that we've really made some headway. And actually, I don't feel personally, and of course the task force might have a different view, that we've got any real substantive issues to address. Quite a lot to noodle on, and a lot of areas lacking some guidance, essential guidance we think needs to come into here. So we'll look at that. We obviously have a lot of work to do still. But it is important to just sort of sit back now and reflect. Is there anything else you feel that we haven't covered sufficiently, or that you feel that the standard might need to address that hasn't necessarily been picked up through the meetings so far? So back to Tom.
Okay, what are we missing, in other words? Sachiko.
Thank you, Tom. I don't think there's something missing, but I just have one comment about a very different topic, which is a numbering of the standard. I think paragraph 5 issue paper indicate that task force will look at renumbering the entire standard for next meeting and thinking about to be consistent with other standard. And my proposal is that maybe for this standard, it would be good to have the numbering system similar to ISA for LCE rather than other standard, because in other words, having part number, section number, and the sequential number for each paragraph. Because there are, I think, two merits. First of all, considering this standard is very long, we need to use big number like 1 to 3 if we have one numbering. And also if we use sequential number throughout the standard, I think it will make very onerous in the future to have conforming amendment, because when we change one number, that means we need to change entire standard. So maybe you can take a look at thinking about considering numbering system similar to ISA for LCE. That's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you. Diane?
Just a thought, and this is just how my brain works. We've covered a lot of things, and as you said, I think there were certain topics that, we asked the task force to go back, do a little extra work on. There were some things that we know the reports are going to come. It might be helpful just if there's and I'm sure the task force has this, but the list of the top 10 big things, right? And maybe we could just share that with the board before we all break out of here and we say, yep, that's the right 10 list. I don't think we're missing anything. We know that's coming, and just to be organized in terms of what are the major areas so that we're working through things as efficiently as possible. I know we're going to talk about timing, but also if there's any, we should talk about the timing. Is everything going to come at once? What's the next round? All that sort of stuff. But maybe that top 10 list, and maybe it's not 10, what that is, that would be helpful.
So in terms of, I think maybe not to say that there isn't substantive issues left, but what I think is fair to say is it didn't seem like there were really substantive impasses right now, but there are substantive issues. And you're saying like, okay, like we know that in response is part 7, there were a number of things, materiality,
the response, materiality,
etc.
estimates.
Yeah, but it just is to focus our board of where we think their attention should be placed. Yeah. Okay. Josephine.
Yeah, so we'll take those away. We have a task force meeting Thursday afternoon, so maybe Friday if we have time. We'll just quickly go through those. That's not difficult. So we will be going through our list of to-dos anyway. So we'll bundle those up into a top 10.
Yeah, my guess is we will have the ability with time on Friday to bring back a couple of these sustainability issues. Veli, your 10 cards up.
Yes, Tom, I think I just wanted to ask, so Josephine, I hope I can speak on your behalf on this one, that maybe, that, for this meeting, we didn't ask for offline comments beforehand, but please, if you have offline comments, it is very important that you send that through to the task force in the next couple of weeks, because they are preparing for the next task force meeting. And so any of those comments will be very, very helpful. So the more we can address now, the better we're going to clear the runway for ourselves.
I think Josephine allowed for that comment.
Yes.
just interpreting her body language there. Okay, we're nearly close out. Yeah, Janine. Koichi.
Thank you very much. Let me share the regulators' overall comment for this sustainability. So first of all, regulators really appreciate the significant progress in such a short period of time. And IOSCO issued a statement in last September, and which identified 3 major areas. One is professional agnostic standard, which is very important for IOSCO. And the second is addressing sustainability specific challenges, which is similar to the 6 topics the board specified. And 3 is the transparency. And these are the 3 major areas we have been discussing at the IOSCO. And I'd like to flag one thing, which is IOSCO is issuing the report, which is focusing on the sustainability assurance. And this report will come maybe in 1 or 2 weeks. And we would appreciate if board members will read the report, and which has more than these 3 subjects, including like connectivity, such kind of aspect as well. And we would appreciate if we can take a look at that, if you can take a look at that. And some of the like granularity about the 3 major points. One is the professional agnostic standard, and we think that key would be engagement with other assurance providers. And I understand the reference group is created, and now the major requirements are developed. So I think it's going to be a good idea to reach out to them and make sure if the standard is specific enough for them to perform. For example, I understand that the audit evidence is basically coming from the ISA 500, and I understand it should be principle-based to accommodate with various engagement. At the same time, I wonder if this is specific enough for the other assurance providers, how much evidence they have to accumulate and how much procedure they have to take. So I think it's important to listen to the other assurance providers, whether the requirements are specific enough. And also the assessment of materiality or requirement for quality standard, the quality control standard, such as demanding as ISQM. That kind of description is sufficient for them, and also it's like possible for them to follow. So that kind of outreach might be very important. And in terms of the addressing sustainability challenges, I understand from today's discussion, like forward-looking information, that kind of aspect, or narrative information, that would be looked at by task force. I also think that it's a very important area, and also the forward-looking information time horizon is much longer than the financial statement audit. So that is why that kind of specific aspect is considered. I think that's important. And also value chain information, how much evidence should be obtained, and how the value chain information can be checked by assurance provider. And also for the global engagement, if component auditor type of people can be used, so that kind of aspect might be also unique to the assurance engagement. So in any case, we will issue the the report soon, and we would appreciate if you can take a look at that. And also, Japanese FSA is doing some outreach to regional stakeholders, and let me share some of the comments we received. And the one thing we hear is the professional agnostic aspect again, and we hear that so right now, different assurance providers use different assurance framework. For example, AA 1000 or ISO 14064, and identifying the difference, and also listen to the assurance provider whether the new structure of the ISSA 5000, how much what is the difference, and whether they can understand the difference, and whether the procedures can be performed by them. So that kind of outreach might be very important. And in terms of the sustainability specific aspect, what I heard is it's very important to understand the difference in experience of the other assurance providers, and make sure same kind of quality can be achieved in the different situations. One is financial statement audit, and assurance can be provided by one assurance provider, or financial statement auditor and assurance providers are different. And for example, other information like 720 type of situation, chances are some kind of collaboration can be needed by these two practitioners. And if that's the case, what kind of communications are required so that the same kind of quality is achieved, even though the assurance can be provided by one practitioner or different practitioners. Let me stop here. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
Thank you. That's very helpful. And we're very much looking forward to the IAASB report. Before we close, I don't want to stop. Josephine, do you have anything more to say? Janine and then Jim.
Thanks. I'd like to commend the board for the impressive progress made on this important project by discussing a full draft of ISA 5000 ahead of schedule, and the good discussions over the last few days. Some remarks from a public interest perspective from my side. ISA 5000 builds upon ISA 3000, including its specific terminology. Consequently, some terminology and definitions used are very professional, accountant-oriented, but maybe less understandable to other assurance practitioners. In this respect, we noticed that clarity is not mentioned among the PIF qualitative characteristics, which the standard intends to achieve, which we believe is important to add. It would be useful if any further efforts to make language profession neutral were coordinated also with the IAASB board. Some stakeholders have criticized ISA 3000 based on its lack of clarity. So the question we have is, what is the process to ensure that the ED evolves in line with market expectations regarding clarity of terminology, particularly as we learned from IFAC research yesterday that other assurance providers are currently mostly using other assurance standards than 3000 and not always seem to provide assurance in accordance with ISA 3000 when they refer to it or claim or seem to use it. We're looking forward, of course, to the inclusion of requirements that address the concept of double materiality and assurance considerations, regroup sustainability information, and regarding the interconnectivity or interconnectedness, whether the practitioner is or is not the auditor, regarding the other information from a user perspective that was discussed this morning. And regarding ethical requirements and quality management at firm level for practitioners that are not professional accountants, I think the right balance is to be found, what would be reasonable to require, ensuring, on the one hand, a level playing field, but at the same time, not raising a very high threshold or barrier that would prevent adoption of the ISA 5000. This is, I think, really a challenge. And I also like to give the board into consideration what first-time adoption or first-time assurance on sustainability reporting would mean in practice, and whether there should be additional requirements or application material or maybe non-authoritative guidance to address related challenges on that. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Janine. Jim?
Thank you, and I'd like to echo what's been said, that the volume of work is very impressive. I do want to reflect on, and this is in part on my own experience, again, where we have non-practitioners using our standards. And I just would want to reiterate the importance of plain English, because we've had a number of nuanced discussions here, which amongst ourselves make complete sense. But when we made a change in our standards to require consideration of internal controls, the consulting firms would call our technical assistance line and say, what are internal controls? And so if you compare that to the level of conversation we're having here, I think you're going to have to make a step back if you're really going to make this a standard that is in plain English for everyone else outside of our profession. Thanks.
Okay. One of the things I do note is that none of this standard has been CUSP yet. And that is, we're going to have a complete CUSP review. And I think a number of comments over the last couple of days has been with the perspective of how would non-audit firm practitioners apply the standard. And so I think we should, next iteration, be very sensitive to it. I think the task force is now particularly sensitized to the issue, but the combination of those two, I think, should help. I do think we are engaging with ISO and accountability already. A number of that will continue to occur through the exposure period as well. And I think we have to have a sense of realism if we're going to get the documented out how much can be accomplished between now and exposure. That doesn't mean that the consultation should stop, but I almost partly, I feel, this is a personal viewpoint, that actually having a straw man out there is a useful starting point. But there's significant engagements happening on the ISO and accountability front already. Okay, I think we're ready to close the session today. This will be the end of the public meeting. Michelle, is there any way you could close the broadcast and let me know when the broadcast is closed? I'll have a couple of administrative announcements.